yeah, you're also my, cousins, but do I want you in my room? I don't know. I'm not sure. Should we share? Like, are we that close? Not so sure.
Hello everyone! Welcome to Dialogue at the Crossroad, and we are on our episode 8. And I am Kathy. I'm here again in front of everyone, and I'm so happy to have with me Eva.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and you said it's 8th episode, right?
8th episode.
Yeah, so it's been a while. I'm, as always, appreciate being here.
And I'm also happy to have you all the time here. And of course, our elder and the most important part of this conversation, Douglas, as he actually started to give out the idea of dialogue at the Crossroad because of his book, which is titled Living Inside Out, Part 1, which is Begin Within. So Douglas, anything that you can share about the entire dialogue at the Crossroad and why we started this?
Well, like a lot of things, we start something not knowing where it's going to lead, and there's a kind of an improvisational element, like let's just do it and then let's see what happens. And the fact that we're continuing means that there's something that is desirable, first of all for us, those who've participated, but then also for those who might be watching or listening through the camera, through the video. And as long as that's the case, I mean, we can have these conversations without a camera, but as long as there's people that are showing interest, we decided to keep doing it. And I think it sort of models what I believe to be a good conversation, because it's not where somebody is controlling it or dominating it, that it's has questions that come up during the course of it, and it has comments and insights and understandings that represent each of our own experiences, which I think is really a great way to share and ultimately to get to know each other, which, by the way, is pretty high on my list of good things to do. It's a real compliment when somebody wants to get to know me. Okay, and I think it's the same way. I honor someone when I'm curious about who they are or how they're thinking about a particular topic. And so, what we do here is not about who's right or wrong or come up to some sort of expert conclusions, but rather we step into a space where each one of us can be comfortable to bring our own thoughts and opinions. And so, yeah, that's, I think, why it's worked so well. And we have the steady now. The three of us are the ones who kind of see each other each time. And we have this seat where someone new comes. And I know I'm very pleased that Monica said, yes, I'll do it. And now we're going to ask her why. This is Monica. Please introduce yourself, and why did you decide to do it?
Why did I say yes? Because I usually say yes. And I like to engage in deeper questions and conversation and thinking together and knowing and understanding through that. So maybe a little bit about me. I come from a Chinese German Jewish heritage. My home is Berlin, but my home is also here in Hoi An at Creative Play, where I am right now. And I'm a writer and a community builder, and I have a project that is called the Oneliness Project, with which I look more deeply into loneliness as not just an individual experience, but also a collective societal experience, and to use it as a lens to understand how we have become more alienated, disconnected, lonely, apart from one another than together, and what the conditions are that need to be shifted, rather than saying, oh no, we have this loneliness epidemic. You can read it, pretty much everywhere these days, and say we have to fix loneliness. I think the point is to understand more deeply where that comes from. Where is that loneliness coming from, and what are the conditions perhaps that need to be shifted in order to embrace loneliness actually as something that is very human and that is shared, and through which we can understand how we want to reconnect more deeply again with ourselves, but also others, other human beings, other beings more than human beings, and the world, like a greater sense of what does it mean to belong and to be part of this world. What does that mean? So I do that through writing and podcasts, so through bringing it into form and communication, then through bringing community together in different experiences that can be very low-key, like shared table dinners. I have like this, people get together, it's a potluck, we come together through different topics and questions that always lie at the heart of our relationality. And then the third part is capacity building. So for anyone who wants to really deepen into relational capacity with themselves, with others, with something greater, that's the third thing. So really learning the skills again, or remembering. So thank you for having me.
Wow, this is just the beginning, few minutes of the dialogue, but you just put out a lot of concepts when it comes to what we're actually talking about here, because I feel like with what you mentioned about loneliness, I feel that all through my life, because I'm an only child, and that's what I'm trying to also let people understand. No, not let them understand, but at least how I found and went through that phase of my life by connecting to people who truly understands me. So finding belongingness instead of fighting your way through a space where it doesn't really resonate what you are, who you are. So when you mentioned about tweaking the environment or the people, so to achieve that kind of feeling that, okay, this need is met. And that's why when you say loneliness, Douglas, is there, as a child, is this something like a need to be seen, a need to, like in your book you mentioned about to be seen in your essence? Is this something that also correlates to how someone really feels so lonely, like deeply? Because I felt that when I was a child, like so profound loneliness.
Yeah, I think there are some ideas that overlap in terms of how I have considered what it is that we see in each other. And I think there is a need that we all have for acceptance, which comes through a kind of validation. So being seen and being accepted, and then to our essence, okay, is different than our behavior, our image, the way we appear, or the ways we perform. And I think that the experience of being known and seen and cared for does offer a counterpoint to feeling alone in a way that is painful. Because feeling alone doesn't necessarily mean painful. In fact, a lot of us like it. I like it. But the lonely is alone and something missing, something that we desire. Maybe it's a fear, we're always going to be alone or something. So yes, I think in connecting the dots is that when we truly feel seen to our essence, which is a really less clear place. It's not our personality, it's not our job title, it's not our role. It's something more character. Well, I don't even know if it's character. It's almost like the spiritual place of each of us, the life force that lives through this being. And I think when we see that deeply and we can feel that from each other, that is the antidote or one of the ways that we feel less lonely. And it also represents the oneness. because it's like a drop of water is part of water, or a flame is part of that fire. We are a separate version of what ultimately we belong to. And if we think in that way, then we see each other in that way.
I thought that, I guess, I'm not sure if there is a question, maybe it will form into a question. Thank you so much for, your intro. It was so interesting. And as Kathy said, that you put out a lot of concepts there, but there is, it just occurred to me while I was listening to you guys that there seemed to be a bit of a paradox. So, Douglas, you connected loneliness with, as I understand, this unfulfilled, maybe even unfulfillable desire to be seen, to our core, to our essence, which, to me it sounds like one of those things that we always crave, and we can never get quite enough of it. But then loneliness implies that a person, say, is not in a relationship, so maybe it's lack of the capacity to relate. So I guess what came to mind is that I feel like it's much easier to see a person, to their core and their essence in this non-judgmental way. I mean, much like I feel what we to some extent share with each other in these conversations. When we are not actually in a we're not in a close relationship with this person, because when it comes to being in a close, emotionally intimate relationship, then so many other needs pop up, and we expect each other to fulfill these needs. So I feel like for me it's much easier to see a stranger in that way, because there is no conflict of interest there, than to see a person that I'm trying to be in a relationship with or build a relationship. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this?
I guess it's such a great provocation, what you just brought up. My thoughts are still with something that you said, Douglas, so I want to just pull on that thread. So the opposite, right? Sometimes people are like, what is the opposite of loneliness? I don't like this binary thinking, but let's just entertain that for a moment. I think it is very much that. It's kind of this need to be, wanting to be seen, yes, and recognized, and part of, as a drop in the ocean, as you said. So I just wanted to underline that, because I think in this world right now, the crux is sort of that many people are looking to fill this void and this sense of disconnection and loneliness in the wrong places. For example, feeling connected by having lots of connections on social media, or feeling like you're seen there through, through a filter in a way, but through a sense of I so want to be seen, so I'm going to put myself out there to hope that somebody's going to give me that validation. I'm going to work really hard. I'm pouring myself into work, because work is identity and purpose, and that's why I'm going to now work so much that I will distract myself also from this feeling, right, of loneliness, but also feel like I am connected to something. Now with AI, of course, that opens a whole other dimension of people deeply attaching to an artificial sense of intimacy, really. So, yeah, I think in that, understanding where do we go in this world that has created so many ways that tell us give us the promise of connection and of being seen, but actually not fully doing that, right? Not fully reciprocating that at all, but it usually ends in something more superficial, often consumerist, a commodity, right? Connection. So yeah, I think there's something interesting in what you just shared, Eva, in saying that perhaps we feel more the capacity to relate to others that we don't feel like we know as intimately, because we can see them maybe from a more objective or more neutral point. I don't know.
I guess what I also meant that there are no mutual obligations, let's say. So it's easy to, fully like dedicate yourself to this person for the time of this conversation, because then you don't have to continue with that. You don't have to. You don't have to move from the point of, okay, I see you, I can relate to your experience, to actually I'm ready to engage with you and maybe to address some of the things that you need. Because like there is a, seeing somebody and what they need is one thing, and stepping up and saying, okay, so for example, let me be there for you. That's quite a different thing.
Yeah.
And it's much more demanding.
Yeah, true. Which, makes me think of there is something there as well about how willing and able and capable do we feel to stay in it, to stay in the relationships and making the effort, because it's work and it stretches you, and especially with the more intimate and close the relationship gets. I mean, I'm thinking about family as well, or like people that you can, that are very close in a way. Even friendships at times, for sure, where it feels like there now is, because of the things that I started to mention about connection and relationships in general being reduced and flattened, like understood as something that I can just opt in and opt out. It's like, oh, I don't like this person anymore, I'll just not respond to their text, or just move to the next country. I'll just, I'll just, I don't know, look for another community, right? It's so easy these days just to not stay in there and not further engage, because it requires, capacity and work and friction and all of that, right? Embracing that. So I'm seeing also, it's related, of course, the loneliness, but also a little bit of the helplessness, or the question of what is then true connection? What is true friendship? And what does it really mean to be a drop in the ocean and feel the ocean, but also myself? Like, what does that mean? And how do I experience that if everything in the modern world tells me that, I can also get by with just people around me, or relationships that don't go that deep.
Yeah, I think this is putting your finger on the tension between this kind of literal reality where we live in conjunction with each other and share experiences that have to be navigated and negotiated, and where power dynamics are part of it, as is our biology. Our sexuality is very much about, we want more than just, oh, you're so beautiful. We want we want to be able to figure out how it is we can actually be sustainably close to someone else. This term of a soul mate and all these things that kind of lend themselves to the kind of connection that we might want or believe in. And I think, I don't know if it's paradoxical, which it might be, but it's certainly this continuum from this more spiritual, seeing each other as who we are in our essence on one hand, and then on the other side, this very literal, whose turn is it to do the dishes? Like functioning in concert with the people in our life. Okay, and that means being willing to have conflict and willing to be working on fairness and working on, ourselves while we're, in relationship to others. So, and I think I think one can preclude the other. I think a lot of us, and I would say me earlier in my life, I didn't have this sort of notion of other people as being something other than the way that I, treated them and they treated me, And so most of the interactions were then somehow, some negotiations. And I think power is an interesting thing to consider there. Who's disempowered and who's powerful and who's empowered, and how do we navigate through that. But I think pragmatically speaking, this end of the spectrum is a really good place for us to spend time and talk, because we can realize that we're all namaste, part of the same whole, but then we got to go about life, right? And we got to feel what we feel when somebody cuts us off on our motorbike, or somebody shows up a half hour late and we're sitting there waiting and wondering where the heck are they, Sorry. I told her, by the way, So the real navigation of life is has a lot to do with how connected and how close and how unlonely we might feel. I would say, last comment, because, that there's a combination of compatibility, okay? There's some people that I know I'm more compatible with than others because we think alike or we know the same things about teamwork, or we somehow or another have a method of communicating that's shorthand. In other words, we get each other without having to go through lots of effort to figure out what we need or what we mean. And then there's most people that those things are more problematic, okay? They don't do teamwork like I do, or they don't have that, shorthand that ultimately comes from time and energy. But and so the reality is we are negotiating and navigating a lot of differences, and cultural and gender and age, and all of these things are a factor. And I think it's actually probably the place where we may feel lonely or not, is whether those things go well or don't.
Yeah, I think, to the spiritual and the mundane, right? It is a practice to connect deeply, right? To relate. And it's something that we don't really, we learn it by doing and failing, trying our best and breaking hearts and having our heart broken and mending again, and that's sort of how we do. But I think increasingly it is important to learn that practice of what does it mean to, yes, work on myself as in my relational capacity to be resilient, to not lose it because you again did not the dishes as I told you, right? To not completely flip, that's something that I can practice, and in communication with the other, of course, always. And I think that's something that has been neglected. We often, I think, take just relationships or this capacity and practice to relate as given, as something that is just there, right? I hope that people will find me and I will find people and we'll figure it out. But I think there's a real need to learn and recultivate, I think, and remember, because it's in us, for sure. It's just we've alienated. In the same way that we've become more separate from nature, understanding, of course, we are nature, and that's beautiful, but what does that mean? Do I want to put my hands into the soil? It's kind of dirty, I am from the city, do I like that? Do I like the little worms and the snakes? Yeah, you are also my, cousins, but do I want you in my room? I don't know, I'm not sure. Should we share? Are we that close? Not so sure. So in that same vein, right, like learning and remembering what does it mean really if we want that, like if we really want to feel less lonely, not because loneliness is the problem, but less lonely as a collective also, and less separate as a society, then we also have to do our part. Like AI is not going to come, or the perfect soulmate, romantic partner, or the perfect place is not going to save us from like bypassing this practice of the mundane and spiritual way of connecting. And the other thing around difference, I think it's such an important point, because often community, I think, is misunderstood as we want sameness, right? We want less friction. We just want to, I mean, it's probably very human. We just want people who are like us. We want to find our village that is our tribe. And I'm always like, who is that? I don't want to spend time with more people that are like me. I want God, like that would be, I don't know. I'm looking for difference, like I'm looking for people who are going to, where I feel like we can rub against one another, and it's like, why is that irritating to me? And it doesn't always have to be so dramatic, but it's just like, okay. I'm like, wow, they seem to be like, they like to play in the dirt. Maybe I can learn something from that. It's like, it's not sameness what we're looking for. We have too much sameness, and we have too much, like, we live in these atomized, super curated bubbles. Not all of us, but many of us, because it's easier to, it feels easier, but it is certainly more, constructive, meaningful and nourishing to live as part of something that comes alive through the differences, and also to see, are these actual differences, or are they just perceived differences? Are you so other than me? Or is it just because I see you and I assume, because from the clothes you wear, from the way that you speak, the interests that you have, that you are other, but maybe I am you and you are me, actually, and we have more in common than I think, and
this is a good, here we are, we call it at the crossroads, right? And we represent paths that have come from very different origins, and if we go back even a generation or more, it's even deeper in that way. So yes, I think maybe we all have that in common, that we'd rather venture out and rub off and rub on to people that maybe have come from or think or represent something different than what we already know. And I think it gets at that deeper question of what does it mean then to be human, to be connected, not through the lens of our, identities, but through maybe this deeper sense of who we are. And navigating is, one thing I think you're going to say something. Go. Jump.
I just remembered, like, the previous dialogues that we have, that I actually shared about my experience when I went to the West in Europe. I grew up in the Philippines. I became who I was in the Philippines up until 2022, and then I went out in Singapore and decided to go to Europe. But then I spent, I think, 5-6 years in Europe, and that brought me into an experience to individualize from where I came from, especially with family, because in Asia we're too much like this, it's good in a way, but it's too much that you don't know who you are anymore, and everything is all about family, all about the mom. So I was able to individualize out from that. But then after years of staying in the West, I also saw, like, people here are so lonely. Like, they are too individualized that they don't even knock on their neighbor's door to ask for a salt. In the Philippines, we could do that. Neighbors could just go in the next door, like, oh, I have this for you. So the sense of community is still there. The family kind of feeling, the connection is still there, even if we came from different families, or we're not even connected by blood. So it's still there. So right now, I feel like, as what you have mentioned, like in the West, that people can be in their own space. They don't even know how to share their room with their cousins because they don't know that feeling of sharing, the connection, because they're too individualized. They're too into themselves. They see other as a separate. So I feel like the society, this is just my own perspective, like the society itself is making everyone who's living there disconnected to themselves, because it's easier to just be a robot, you know, not feel and just do the task. So when I was working also in the hospital, in the beginning, I had this very emotional, like empathy to the patients, like, oh, so I take care of you, love and care. But then after 2 years of working there, I see them as a task. Oh, have I finished giving them medication? Have I changed this? Have I changed this? So, and it actually feels, for me personally, it feels like I lost part of myself, a huge chunk of myself, that I can't live that way for so long. That's why I apart from having the the accident that really made me push to resign and change everything, I feel like I can't stay here. And the people who are in that society right now, perhaps they don't know that there's a different way of living connected to yourself, living in nature, as what you've said, and also living in a way that they can find the connection just being alone, but also find themselves being together. Does that make sense? So when you talked about creating this space for people to connect, most probably these people who feel so disconnected to themselves could feel connected to themselves again because of the space that you bring in. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, for me, there's a couple of really interesting thoughts, which is that, you know, there's a saying about fish living in water and not knowing it, you know. And the metaphor holds up because I think it's true that people can live within the bubble of their experience, and it could be culturally or socially determined, and not realize that there's something about that isn't the whole of what is possible. And I think we are examples of people who have stepped out of what, let's call it a bubble. I don't really like that as a metaphor, but the sense that there's a limitations to our experiences that don't allow us to expand into what is partly unknown. And I think your experience was related to that, where you could see it from an outside perspective, and then you saw yourself being socialized to be normal in a place that then you felt like you were losing part of yourself. And you had the wherewithal to go, wait a minute, okay, maybe I'm getting away from something that feels a little too close, but I'm also stepping into something that has its own set of limits. And then you ventured out again. And maybe this is a relevant topic, because in order for us to overcome what often is thought of as a kind of a socialization or the influences of, you know, a family, a society, a culture, a religious expectations, we have to be willing to go it alone, you know. It's what I have referred to as the road less traveled, you know, the sense that we're going outside of the norms or the expectations or even the pressures to stay within what it is that's most familiar to us, you know.
I have a thought here. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Kathy. And you know, I was just thinking that you're totally right that, you know, the first step, I guess, would be to step out of the initial environment and see that there are different like modes of being, different ways of living, different like intensity and degree of this connection if we compare the East and the West. For me, I guess the main struggle is to, you know, once I've seen a few options, to understand which one works for me, and to understand like how do I live my life more or less authentically without being overwhelmed with guilt, which to some extent might be even, you know, valid, or because I feel like I'm still looking for somebody to tell me what is normal. Because being somebody who was born and raised in Russia, well, there is this Russian cultural narrative, sort of, you know, the story, the the mythology of the culture, and it's also implicit in the language. But then, since I'm the kid who was born in the late 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so we had all of this like information flow from the West, the United States mostly, the movies, you know, that narrative. And frankly speaking, it was there before also, censored, yes, but still, you know, the story of the hero, it was always there. So even without leaving my country, I could see different, let's say, narratives, but then, you know, which do you pick? Even when it comes to the language, when I describe my path to myself, depending on the language that I use, I feel more like, okay, so I have, you know, I'm exercising agency. I'm trying to be the writer of my own story. I'm choosing myself, and it's a good thing, you know, it's like almost a moral thing to do, versus, you know, like, I'm a traitor. I'm not disrespecting, but, you know, I'm ungrateful. I'm ungrateful for what was given to me. I'm not there enough for my family, like, you know, which is something that is morally wrong. So you see, I can't step out of this categorical thinking, right and wrong, good and bad, and I'm still searching for apparently some external figure to tell me, you know, okay, so this is okay, this is what you can do. So I guess that's, yeah, personally for me, that's probably the hardest part, to understand where I fit.
I just want to kind of follow up with what she mentioned about feeling guilt of living your life, because we had this conversation most of the time. I think that for me, who I'm born and raised in a country and a culture where everyone revolves around family. Like, even having your own identity feels like this is wrong. So, but I feel like the way I was brought up also, like single child. My mom was you know, busy with something else. So and my dad died when I was 5. So I really found myself within myself at a young age. So I have to individuate in a way out from my parents. So that's really necessary, right? So I got that strong sense of self, as I have talked before, but all throughout this experience and journey in life, I feel the strong guilt of having that agency, having that okay, I'm the writer of my life, because I feel like the script is already there, but then I fought not to follow the script, but make my own way, even if I don't even know where this way will take me. So the road less taken. So I don't know how it is in the West. How is it in Asia, in the US, or in Germany for you? Like, okay, follow yourself, follow what you're doing, or however. But for me as an Asian, we have this really strong sense of being attached to the cultural, the familial, everything that is presented to us, that even individuating takes so much courage and so much pain. Like, up until now, I can feel like this is not my way. I shouldn't be here. Am I an imposter? Like, but being around people who's doing it, I feel strong, like being around you. But if I am actually going back home, it always comes back. Am I doing right? What am I doing with my life? So with what you're saying, you're still in that category of feeling like, someone will tell you, okay, you're doing good. That's okay, because you are. But the reality here is that it takes so much pain and guilt. Yes, that's how. But you have to go through that to be able to pass through and go on the next part of the feeling. Make sense?
I think it's I also left what was expected of me because I walked away from the religious aspect of the family and the subculture that I was raised in. Went to Christian schools, and our community was based on the religious. And so when I came to some realizations at late teens that felt incongruent with how I saw things, that became a marker of something I no longer included myself in. And I remember then that was also preceded me moving out to Seattle. So first I lived in my community and felt like the black sheep, felt like the one who was always being looked at through the lens of, oh, that's the kid from that family who da-da-da-da, And yes, I felt guilt because somehow or another I didn't match what people expected or wanted of me. And when I got to Seattle, I realized I don't know who I am. I know who I'm not. I know who I'm not, or at least who I don't, how I don't identify with what is expected of me. And I've really fumbled my way through my 20s and 30s and made mistakes that were, attempts to claim something. I married someone that I didn't even get to know before I married her, And, I really fumbled and stumbled forward, not having a sense of who I am, but also kind of like, panning for gold. You get rid of the things and then you discover, oh, there's more of what is who I am. And I think I was actually, in my early 40s, so older than all of you by quite a long time, where I actually felt like, wow, okay, I'm now in that range where my life is a reflection of the choices I've made and the things I want. And I felt a certain kind of, okay, I had gotten somewhere. And I felt more and more like I knew what I was. And then I started even more deeply to fill in what I valued, what I would do and wouldn't do. Probably people around that time weren't always happy with me because I was so opinionated, right? And I had all these ideas about how we should do things differently than the scripts, wherever they might be. But I do think that the painful parts of where you might be in your life are steps and stages of a process that ultimately guide you closer and closer. Now, let's come back to the sense of loneliness, okay? That is a lonely experience, or let's just say it's an alone experience. The responsibility only falls in one place. It falls on each one of us. And there's very many times when being understood or being validated, approved of, isn't coming in any big ways. In fact, the opposite might be true, where people would not like that status quo to be challenged. And for somebody that's different, that's an anomaly to what we already agree upon. Let's root for the sports teams and let's go to church on Sunday and let's do all these things that are sort of, if somebody's doing it differently, that's a bit of a threat. And I think I came to a realization that that's not something I need to feel guilty about. Okay, that's something that actually gives other people the possibility to go deeper into their own self-discovery, because they realize, there's something other than what I'll add one more point here, which is that midlife. You know, everybody knows midlife crisis, right? Well, midlife is often the point where people start to realize that what they signed up for and what they bought into doesn't actually hold the value they thought it did. And so there's a period of adjustment of going, well, I thought a house and a car and a wife and some kids, or whatever the script is, was what I was going to do, make me happy. And now I'm having to rethink. So I always tell people I would rather you go through your midlife struggle in your 20s and 30s than you did, because when you get to your midlife, then you've already sorted things that some people just avoided. Okay? So it's just another developmental way to think about this process. So.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you, I think this is like to me, a lifelong process. Like the idea of me as a self, and always in relationship though to others, and a sense of, let's call it community, let's call it belonging. Where is the self and where is the collective in a way? And that plays out in different ways, whether I'm in, say, Western societies that are much more individualized in how life works and how values are maintained and so forth, versus perhaps here in this part of Asia, where of course the collective is more there. So there's things we can learn from one another. I think it's an interesting way to look at it culturally. Yeah, and at the same time, I also think it's important to name that this process, the actual process of saying, I'm going to step out of the constraints, for me, the constraints or the conditions of how I was raised, and whether that is religious, whatever norms, that is a huge privilege also, right? Like some people aren't able to do that, right? And they would love to. I'm sure we all want to. We all would love to, I think, explore more and go more deeply and make different experiences and do that maybe at a younger age or at a different time in our life. But there are so, like, the majority of people in this world, they're not necessarily given this opportunity. So it's a painful process, but also I'm trying to always remind myself, like, it's a huge privilege and gift that I can just say, yeah, I'm starting this, I'm trying this with this work. I'm not going to look for a 9-to-5 job, because that's not what I want to do anymore. I want to live here, I want to live there, like I want to make, that's a big gift, and in that, yes, there comes loneliness too, and other painful experiences maybe, but in a way that's not, I don't know if that's something that's inevitable. Ultimately, it's just that we learn to, hopefully, bit by bit, like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back kind of way, to embrace it more and to befriend it. Like, I often think of this idea of how to befriend loneliness as much as other more difficult experiences. How do we learn to befriend it, to embrace it, to say, I'm no longer going to avoid and pretend that you do not exist, that I don't feel like, I have friends, I have family, I have, enough people, but still, yeah, sometimes I feel lonely, right? Or that we can say that and in expressing it and naming it and then relating to that loneliness, I think there's something there that can help to bring us closer to something that we're longing for.
I love that. Thank you, Monica. As what I can hear is that you learn how to sit with and acknowledge that part of yourself trying to shout like, Monica, please, I'm here, give me some attention. And I totally agree with you. Like, if someone just knows how to navigate around that, it's painful in a way, but that's the process, you know? And then if you have gone through that, you can now guide people on how to do it. And then thank you. So beautiful. Yeah.
This idea of what I agree to be entitlement, or the sense that actually we represent a subset of people for whom our particular suffering isn't keeping us within a set of limits. And of course we can look many places in the world today where people are in survival mode, or they're struggling with the pain of war and poverty and many of those things that are grippingly limiting.
Yes.
And it's very important, I think, that we put what we're talking about into that kind of a context. And for a couple reasons. Number one, because it does represent sort of a gift that we're somehow the benefactors of. Life somehow allows us to be sitting at the crossroads and having traveled and having done these things. And the second part is that I think it comes with a responsibility. Because if one of the questions we're asking is, how do we live into a potential? How do we answer these questions with and for each other about connection, and what makes life of the quality of experience that we would all desire? And not to escape what's painful and difficult, but to say life has that spectrum. And I think it represents some of the hope that for those who are bound by the limitations of their circumstance, they can see, there's something other. And it's not fancy cars and 5-star hotels. I mean, it might be, but for me it's certainly not. But it is living an authentic life in a way that's connected to our circumstance, our situation, and the people that we're sharing it with. It's a realness. It's living life in what I think of as simple ways, but that are authentic to the time and the place we're living in. And humanity needs this next version of what that is. We didn't grow up in tribes or we're cast out into this collective kind of chaotic reality with all this information available to us. But our responsibility, I think, for those who don't have this opportunity is to do the best we can to bring what it is that connects us. And ultimately, I think it's hard not to have a conversation like this without including the concept of love. If love isn't part of it, then something significant is missing. Okay, and yes, there's that romantic sexual version of it, but there's a lot of other versions of it. And I think these are the questions we need to keep. Where's the love? Where is that when we're sitting together talking? Or, is it kindness and compassion, caring, and is it listening? And
I think it's the responsibility. I think that's the point, right? We don't, having this gift to be able to go this path that I want to, and this balance between me and the collective society and so forth, I think comes with a responsibility not just to live my life in the most authentic way and, you know, go to the places that I want to because I can, but also to think about what is my responsibility in enabling others, right? And that means ultimately, because we're all part of, systems, right? How do we bring that responsibility into systems that we're a part of? So if we talk about loneliness and connection and love, yes, it's a bold idea, but it's exactly what we need. How does an economy work centered around care and love look like, and kindness and justice? How does that actually, it's possible, but like, are we willing to do that? Like, the frameworks are all there. the thinking has been done, like in this part, and keeps on happening. But like, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to integrate that as leaders, as people who go maybe into these spaces and want to have these kinds of conversations and provoke, and to say like, yeah, how could this work? What about politics as well, right? Like the way that we understand democracy and our way of being a citizen in a country. Whether or not we align with the politics doesn't matter, but we all have a responsibility, I think, especially right now, to show up and practice this way of citizening as a verb, like to participate. Yeah, what kind of a civic life do I want? Like, what kind of housing do we want? What kind of public space do we want? Do we want more cars and streets and traffic, or do we want more trees? And we want more space where elderly and children and people can walk and hang out and spend time and play games. Like, there's decisions we can all influence in enabling a more in a life that is not just serving us as individuals, but us as a collective. And I think that is something that I'm trying to remind myself of always as I'm going forward, but also through this work, where it becomes much more tangible in a way, to say like, okay, true, in a society that would embrace and befriend loneliness and not pathologize it, how would that look like? What kind of values would we have? What kind of economic system, financial system, like what kind of systems would we have to have, and can we move towards that in order to empower more people to go their way? That doesn't always have to be, I'm leaving my everything and going for something new, but it can also come in small ways of like, I'm a mother with a child, a single mom, and I don't have to worry about child care or whatever and organize my entire life and work 2 jobs because I'm trying to sustain, but there's a sense of collective support, and it's no longer so the burden of the individual anymore. Like, it could come in smaller ways, I think, how we can find this autonomy, or it's not even the sense of the life that we want to live.
You mentioned something about you're creating space and enabling people to see that there's a possibility for them to feel not lonely, but meet that feeling by tweaking things. Do you have like a tangible or things that you share to people that this could help, this might help you in the situation that you are in? Because I totally understand what you said, that what we're doing right now, just living the life authentically, even if it costs you the old life that you have. Not everyone has that capacity. Not everyone is how do you call that word you said, like privileged enough. How do you make them feel that whatever situation they're currently at, there's still things that they can tweak for them to go through that?
Yeah, I think to that question or point, I think the majority of us are not really necessarily aware that there is maybe a longing to connect differently. Most people that I gather and work with, they wouldn't consider themselves the loneliest people on earth, right? It's not like, wow, loneliness, that's what it is. And that's sort of part of the first, part of my work that I'm trying to expand and deepen the sense of what is loneliness and how can it come in smaller moments, more superficial, sometimes more in depth, so that it comes out of this very stigmatized and limited and very shameful understanding of loneliness that is always like, oh, it's this one person that is also alone physically and that is socially disconnected from society and isolated. It's like, of course, yes, examples of people like just described exist, and yes, there is certainly a sense of loneliness, but also there are so many different notions of loneliness. So I think the first thing that I'm trying to bring to the groups or the people that I work with is that awareness, right? The awareness of an understanding of, okay, so I do feel like something is missing, but I can't really say what it is because from the outside everything feels like pretty fine, and I have enough people. It's not like I don't feel like seen or connected, but still something is missing. And why is that? And understanding self in relation to systems, right? Like to the conditions of like, okay, because I hold the belief that is, right, normalized, that to be happy means to have a lot of friends, for example. Let's just pick that, right? To be extroverted and go out every weekend and have some exciting plans for Friday, and if you don't, you're like a loser. So if I understand that, this is a norm in a way that we celebrate as society, and it's actually not aligned with who I am, because I like a handful of friends that go deep, and that's okay, and it's enough, and I don't have a super big social battery to party every weekend, then that already creates, right, one example, but that already creates a sense of awareness and understanding of needs, ultimately. Okay, so my need for connection and community, to be seen, to be in relationship, is different from what perhaps the so-called norm is. And there's other people. That's sort of what happens always in my work, because I inherently work in groups or communities. It's like, you are actually similar to that, or you can relate to my feeling, you can relate to my reality, even though we don't know each other, and you live a different life. And that's where, on another level, the loneliness is softened in a way, because I know that I'm not alone in my experience of longing and of loneliness, because I see that it's not my fault. Actually, I can shift something, and actually I'm not alone in that at all. I'm not the only one. And that's very liberating, again, in a small ways.
It feels like so much of what we're talking about has to do with our individual experience of separating from norms and expectations, and even not knowing the kinds of ways in which we're feeling the loneliness of conforming or being complicit in the order. And so then it feels like a lonely journey, right? The road less traveled is the one. And I wonder if we're anywhere near the point where we start thinking about formalizing. You said, I prefer to be with fewer friends that have a deeper connection. And I mean, without having scripted it like, okay, this is what our plan is, I think creative play is kind of an example. Creative play residency, and for those of you who don't know, it's a place where people live a lifestyle that's predicated on the idea that creativity is a reasonably shared and desirable activity. So it can have all different forms, but creativity is part of a lifestyle. And we've attracted people here with that intention. And it just seems to fit in a way what we're talking about, because it's an alternative to what is, wherever we come from, and it is meant to sort of satisfy this connectedness, okay, by sharing experiences with each other, particularly in a playful way, non-judgmental way, in a way where there's room for self-expression, and there's also room for seeing each other when we're most alive, when we're coming to life through our creative process. And I just think, maybe it's more by accident than on purpose that we've stumbled into something that might be a kind of a model. Are there models? Is there an ideal number? Can 12 people sort of get to know each other in such a way that they have what it takes to cultivate the alternative to what then, wherever we're from is the normative expectation. And the second part on this is, can we take everyone, or should we even try to take everyone with, should we feel responsible for the bigger, or should we just do what we're doing, and if it actually has merit, those who are ready to discover it will follow, or will discover their own version of it, or whatever it is, And right now, and I'm probably because I'm old, I'm caring less and less and less about what are norms, what are expectations that somebody somewhere has of me. I don't run it through the filter of what other people think all that much. Not that I'm devoid of that, but I'm not guiding my life based on, some expectation that comes from somewhere else. And I just wonder if that's a way to think about this. What are the conditions, social and otherwise, that make a little small pocket of what we want in a way that might be sustainable, or at least might be good for now, So,
what I find peculiar, just reflecting a little bit on where we are, and obviously all of us seem to feel very comfortable and genuinely good here in this space, which is located in Vietnam. And just a bit earlier today we talked about our cultures. Well, I think that Philippine culture is even more interdependent, even less individualized. Russia is probably somewhere in the middle of between the East and the West. Well, at least I'm from a more European part, so yeah, it lands approximately in the middle also on this scale. But I also experienced this wish to step out, because my family has these dynamics of is an enmeshment, that's the word, right? A bit of fusing together. So it's we, but it's not very clear what is I and how do I set the boundary. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because they are functioning well together, and it's like a sustainable system as a family. There is a lot of warmth, a lot of love. It's just that I, being a kid who struggled with boundaries, it was difficult for me, so I felt this need to step out and sort of just switch into the polar opposites. So loneliness was a huge part of it, but I was like, okay, I would rather feel isolated than be consumed. Because isolation is something painful but manageable. I learned to handle that, but being consumed is just like existentially terrifying. But the thing is that I brought myself here. As soon as I came to Hoi An, I wanted to stay. And Vietnam is a culture with comparatively, little boundaries, as we can all observe. And I just find it peculiar that, I like being here while not being a part of that. So I think I've lived most of my life in this observer mode. And I like to be an observer here. It makes me feel a little bit less alienated when I can see this, the Vietnamese communities, Vietnamese families, all the love and warmth and children that they have, all that very close to me, while not stepping in. And I guess the tricky part is, how do I bring it in my life to the extent that I want to have it, to the extent that I can manage it? Because I know how to be an observer, and obviously I prefer to observe this than, for example, Western individuation, the extreme version of that. But it terrifies me, but at the same time I chose to stay here. I find this environment as good as it gets for me personally.
But aside from the context of being in Vietnam, you've also selected people to share experiences with. I mean, I know that you and Kathy are quite close and you live together, and there's ways in which whatever that newness is happening. I mean, I don't know how satisfactory that is for you, or whether you see it as this is it, but the fact that we're here and so there's something. You see, there's something. And I think we all have to figure out what that is, okay, and whether that's what we cultivate, or that's how it is we represent the forefront of our own experiences, in ways that see what we're leaving behind, what we're contextualized in, and what we're doing, And I would even go step further in this, what's happening, because I don't think we can orchestrate it. I think we can discover it. I mean, we had a birthday party last night, okay, for Kathy, and I'm sitting there thinking, wow, how did this happen? There's a specialness between people from all these different places who are genuinely there with a care in their heart to want to honor and celebrate and share the kind of experience that's possible, okay?
Can I just say something here? I guess that my brain is making this connection, like the absolutely lovely night that we have. It did feel very special, and I'm so grateful to you guys for, being this part of the community that I have here. And I feel like this feeling of genuine connection, apparently I still don't know how to handle it very well, because I feel like my body is reacting. So I mentioned that yesterday I felt a lot of so much emotion bottled up in me, and I woke up getting sick last night, and then this overwhelming anxiety. So I mean, I'm just observing. It's very interesting, but it feels that as I mentioned before, it's one thing to observe something beautiful and appreciate it, and listen to people and look into them. It's quite another thing to step in and start interacting with. And that's where the friction comes. And I mean, I feel like it's not even about the real friction, because there were no conflicts, but the prospect of having certain mutual like obligations or expectations, it's still really difficult to navigate. Yeah, so there is no question, it's just just thinking out loud.
We actually talked about like living together right now, how I was explicitly telling her that, oh, we actually are living alone together. That's what I told you, like the people that I'm currently living right now have their own different lives, but then if we feel like, oh, we want to socialize and meet, and we'll just meet in the common shared space. So I'm pretty much someone who, okay, I can literally feel if someone started to fuse, as what you call that, like the fusing, the merging, attachment. And that will make me feel like, oh, someone will take away my freedom. I have to compromise and share my time. It's good. It's good if it's family, it's your boyfriend. I could compromise. So basically, that's how it should be, like relationships, right? You have to invest part of yourself. But there's these moments where I feel like it's too much merging now. It's too much fusion that's happening that causes the friction. And with what we're having, which is, I can really see that it's living alone but together, it's working for us. It's working so well because we're so immersed in our own world right now. But instead of grabbing someone to pour everything what you have, we sometimes do that, Eva. I also come to you, you come to me, Blake. So we're also doing that as a friend, But we have this. I feel like since we moved out from a cultural stigma where we came from, we are aware of how much capacity we can sit with ourselves, but still ask for help, ask for support, and that's what I value so much with the community that we have, because for me, like, okay, I live freedom life, and this is also one, I feel like in the world right now is where a lot of people right now is trying to work online. They wanted to have this flexibility, to have this choice to live what kind of life they want to. Some of them are just taking their office everywhere, but they're still working. So basically, it's also another privilege, right? But the thing here is that a lot of people are kind of like turning that way because of AI, because of technology, but it's still in that space where they are connecting to a lot of people instead of looking inward and be self-aware of what's currently existing within them. So the community that we are in is that we have the flexibility because we work online, 4 of us, the people we knew, but then we are aware about who we are, what's currently happening inside. Am I giving away my responsibility to look into myself and socialize and be an adult to someone else, or am I taking so much responsibility of the well-being of this person? So we're aware, like, okay, we're all adults here, so we know where the boundary is, and that's what I like with the people here in Hoi An. Yeah. So with your book, Alone Together, right? It's like finding your individuality within the collective. So I feel like that function in the community really works well.
One of the things I grapple with is a feeling of community and connection that might lack a feeling of intimacy. Okay, and the shared experience that I think, yes, I like being here, I like being with these people, I like listening to people tell us a story about when they were 25 or the things, But yes, it depends on which lens I look through. If I measure my life through how much intimacy do I have, okay, I'm going to come up short, okay, because I don't have a partner, and a partner is usually the person with whom you have that kind of closeness. I mean, just lying in the same bed with them night after night or however often, it's that kind of closeness. And I wonder if we use that as our barometer, intimacy, closeness, if we come up with a different answer than if we use the barometer of shared experiences that are heightened, in the ways in which we, really do get to know each other and see each other and play with each other and have fun. And so I could easily run even the experience I've had for the past few days, which have been quite amazing with lots of other people. I could run it through the filter of, but not that intimate, not that intimate. I still am sitting in my seat, looking through my lens, feeling a difference or a distance between myself and every other person. Okay? Or I can run it through the filter of, wow, this is actually quite uniquely shared, uniquely honoring of each one of us, because we're getting to be ourselves amongst the others. And so, yeah, I have both of that, and I can also certainly walk away from some of those really great experiences and feel quite alone and separate, because my particular angle, my age or my, my gender, or the things that often are things that would, represent differences, they can be louder than the things that represent the common connection. So I think it is an internal process to figure out, okay, what are my expectations, and even how do I go about this process of intimacy and what it means to feel close and safe and connected and heard and listening.
Yeah, I think intimacy is the right term.
Yeah.
And it's not just, right, it's not just physical intimacy, it's emotional intimacy, it's the intimacy of being known, the intimacy of being truly seen, and there are so many, I think, moments that can feel deeply intimate, even with a stranger, and sometimes, yes, with a very close one, like that can truly make you feel seen, and that is to recognize, though, that difference. Is it intimacy, or is it connection, or is it community? Is it like we're just using, where is the difference? And like the knowing of that and understanding, and then cultivating towards whatever we feel like is lacking, or like we would like to cultivate more of. That's the true art in a way, or like path, right? Because only to be together, like togetherness, it's not togetherness, and that's sort of what I struggle with a lot, or not struggle, but like where it's like in the whole conversation about loneliness and community even, and what is called community these days. Everything is now community. It's also a product, it's a business, so of course everyone is like latching onto it, but like this understanding or misunderstanding that the opposite of loneliness is togetherness and connection. It might be actually more something like intimacy, right? And this feeling of where we started the conversation of the feeling of being truly seen and recognized and known, but also to reciprocate that. And I think that's interesting now in the context of AI, because there's now this term artificial intimacy, or it's been coined by Sherry Turkle, who's an MIT sociologist, and she talks about, as many now do, the way that many people are now attaching to an AI and describe it exactly as such, as in, I know it's not real, I know it's not a human being, I know it's a thing, but I feel seen, and I feel understood, and I feel understood and recognized in a way that is hard to achieve with other human beings. And I think that's really, really interesting, because there is something more there than just dismissing, people to say like, oh my gosh, they're crazy. Why are they talking to the AI? Do they have AI friends? I'm like, it's not that crazy actually, because there seems to be something there for us to look at, right? It's like, are we able to to give that intimacy to one another? Are we able to see each other truly? Like, are we able to tell the difference before we kind of judge, for example, in this example, right, of saying like, oh, you're talking to ChatGPT as your therapist, as your friend, as your mentor, like, why don't you talk to a human being? Well, there are many reasons. So I think that's, something interesting happening right now. Is like, how do we, come back to something that we seem to be losing or not really prioritizing or seeing as something important, not just for our own well-being and flourishing, but like for all of us and the relationships we're part of.
This is a very huge topic because I feel like a lot of people is actually experiencing, as what you have said, like finding all these, like needs that are met through AI, but losing the humanness, like the real connection of what is here. But we only have 5 minutes left in our dialogue right now.
That's a good cliffhanger.
Yes.
Think about that as you listen at home. Bring the conversation into your creative play.
I want to make one comment that might be launching our next one, because I think, whether it's AI or another person, okay, that somehow solves the problem of whatever we're calling it, validation, or that thing that sort of bridges us, for me, what I think really is where we need to pay attention is the degree of pain we're in, okay? The most lonely place there is to be alone with our own pain. I really see this with the people that I've worked with who are depressed. They're so alone in the inner experience of their depression that it becomes more depression, okay? Aloneness and pain coincide. And if we find ways to deal with our own pain, in other words, to be able to acknowledge it and name it, like what you're describing. Our loneliness is something that's part of who we are. So therefore it's not pulling on us or overwhelming us, okay? It's an integration of a truth that we can live with. So it diminishes the degree to which we're in pain. I think maybe what coincides is the degree to which we feel lonely, okay? And then the ways in which we interact with people when we don't. The difference being able to see the party through the lens of, isn't this great that we're together, versus the part that's feeling the lack of an intimacy or something that's maybe not quite that ideal. So I do think this is to be continued. And that, isn't it amazing that 90 minutes can go by and we can keep...
Monica, we're so grateful to have you here, but we will be so delighted to have you more so we can continue this dialogue.
Well, I live here, so...
But before we end this episode 8 of the dialogue, and I feel that we brought a lot into the table today in this space. I would love to invite you to, share where people could find you in your online space and where to find your work.
Yeah, where to find me? You can find me on Substack. So I write a newsletter. I write essays every now and then. And I release podcasts. So the Substack is oneliness.substack.com. And then you can find me under my name, Monica, with a K. Jiang. Jiang, yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, other places.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that concludes our episode 8 for today. Thank you. Amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
I love it.